my mom had a reading with a woman in Manhattan who was a very prestigious psychic in her own rank. And she didn't do what would be considered house parties, which is like take out Tupperware, bring in psychic.
Yeah.
And she agreed to do that if she could meet me. So like there was this very weird moment when my mom came home and said, August, whatever, you know, you're going to be here. And I went, where am I going? I was 15. I'll go, well, where am I going to be? And she said, well, this woman, Lydia Clark's coming and she wants to meet you. And I was like, who's Lydia Clark? And she said, oh, she's a psychic. And I remember I was like, why does the psychic want to meet me? Like that was like never had happened before. And she said she agreed to come to the house and she never does that. So I took her up on the opportunity, but her one caveat was that she wanted to meet you. And I was like, so I'm like bait, like I'm the bait to get her here. And my mom laughed and she goes, she's really, really good. And I laughed and I was like, okay. And then I forgot about it. And then she reminded me like, hey, make sure that you're here on whatever the date was. And then the woman came and I met her and she was a lovely lady. And she kind of like, you know, I guess she looked psychic the way she like, you know, the way she looked for me. And she read, I want to say she read like 17 people that day. Yeah, she read a lot of people. There was a lot of people that my mom got to come to have these like really mini readings. And I think she had read about 7 people. And then my grandmother had come down from the room crying. And that pissed me off because I was like, that's my grandma. Like, I'm like, what did this woman say to you to make you upset? And she said, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm happy. I didn't really care. My grandmother was crying. Like, what did the stranger say to my grandmother in her house? That's disrespectful and rude. So she told my grandmother that her husband was standing next to her and gave her all these messages from my deceased grandfather, who I did not know. And one of the things was she got her name, he got his name, how he passed, a whole bunch of things. And then I said to my grandmother, I go, Grandma. She said his name was Tony, and his name was Anthony. So I go, Grandma, you were introduced to her as Mrs. Esposito. You don't get more Italian than Esposito. It's like Smith in Italy, right? I'm like, I don't think it's a big stretch that somewhere there's going to be a Tony in the Esposito family. Yeah. And without skipping a beat, my grandmother looked at me and said, if you don't believe that the grandfather that you don't know loved me more than life itself and is still with me, sounds like a you issue. Like, that's your problem. She goes, how would that woman know that he was buried with a mandolin? I didn't know he was buried with a mandolin. And I was like, why was he buried with a mandolin? Apparently he used to play the mandolin. So I didn't even know that. So then I didn't take that at face value. I went back to the list of people that Lydia read before my grandmother to see which person on that list she could have extrapolated that information from and then give it to the old lady in the house. None of the people that went before my grandmother were family. Like, none of them would know that. So I was like, how the hell would she know that? So then I said, well, my mom knows her. Maybe my mom told her. Maybe that came up in my mom's conversation. Like, so I'm always logical. I'm always looking for the logic of it. And then that's what got me to go for a reading. I wanted to prove to my family that she wouldn't be able to read me and she wasn't going to be able to get anything out of me. So my intention was I would sit opposite her and I would just do the following.
For those that are just listening, he's not doing anything.
Exactly. Straight face, like, yeah. I'm going to give her nothing.
Yeah.
And then I sat with her and she took my high school ring at the time and she kind of like put it to her forehead, looked down and never looked at me. And then just started talking. And that put me on my path. She was spot on.
What did she say? What did she say to you?
She told me that I had this is where it gets a little weird. She told me I had highly evolved beings of white and gold light and they were ready to work with me and that I was going to change the way millions of people looked at her field. I was 15. She could have.
So you were a non-believer. So this seemed like
this seemed like she said she landed her spaceship in the backyard and she'd take me for a spin when we were done.
So she told you had this power.
Mm-hmm.
This is the path you were gonna. From that reading to when did you have an experience?
So from that reading, which by the way, she ended it with stuff that was like accurate, but I didn't know how accurate it was for about a week. She gave me outcomes to circumstances that nobody in my family knew about. And they played out in a way that made me go, crap, like this is uncomfortable. And I say uncomfortable because I didn't see it as cool. I saw it as a violation.
Oh, that's how you feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw it as a violation and I was like, oh, I don't like this. I've like, this woman walked around my life and then knew stuff. And then wait a minute, she had like insights about what was going to happen with these people. Don't like this. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm so psychic, let me go learn about it. It was more like, I feel like I got energetically robbed and I want to put a security system in. Is this possible? And that sent me to the public library. And that's where my life really started to change, because in 1985, there were no new age books or psychic books. It was under the occult section. So I would sit on the floor of the public library and I was embarrassed to check the books out because it had the word occult. I didn't know what that meant, which just means hidden, secret, arcane knowledge, right? But back then it sounded like cult. So I sat and read every day as much as I could after like high school. And I learned that there were people writing books in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. There were folks like Carl Jung and some of the, the forefathers of the United States that were Masons, who all have had metaphysical belief systems. I learned about, Madame Blavatsky from Russia. I learned about Edgar Cayce in Virginia. I learned about Jean Dixon and astrology, but I learned about reincarnation, numerology, psychometry, tarot. I learned a lot in a very, very short period of time. And then after I literally exhausted everything that was at the library, I went to a local bookstore, and it was a Walden bookstore on Glen Cove Road in Long Island, for the folks that know the area. And I walked to the back of that store, again, the cult section, and the way that the books, the shelves were, they were like on an arc, right? So there were like very sparsely shelves, not a lot of new material was there, but they had tarot cards, and a deck of cards literally fell off in front of me. Like, if I didn't see it, I wouldn't believe it, but I'm telling you, it happened. And the lady that was running the store, she was like on the middle like shelf, and she like looked over and looked at me and she went, clearly you're supposed to buy those. So I bought them, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I felt like I was doing like a drug deal. I don't want anybody to see me with these in my house, so I take them in my house, and I'm looking at the little white book that comes with the 78 cards that tells you what the cards mean and how to read them. And then that Sunday, my cousin, there was always like 20 people in my grandma's house because she had 11 kids. They had kids. And if you knew my grandmother, she was like Sophia from the Golden Girls. If you didn't show up on Sunday, there was hell to pay. So we always had a house full of people. So my cousin came, and I was like, hey, can I like try something for you? And she went, sure. I was like, I want to try to like read your cards. So I did. I did what the book said. I looked at the cards, and they kind of like told me a story, or I, kind of put things together in the way that I interpreted it. And then like a week or two later, she said, hey, you're going to be at grandma's on Sunday. And I went, yeah, why are you coming? And she's like, yeah. She's like, I want you to do my cards again. I was like, Florence, please. I go, I have no idea what I'm doing. I go, I'm just messing around with this. And she's like, yeah, well, mess around again, because everything you said was going to happen happened. I was like, yeah, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And she said, no, there's no way that you would have known a couple of those things, and I didn't even tell you that you're right. She goes, and then they happened. And she goes, and can I bring 5 friends? And that's literally how it started.